Thank you all for coming. My name is Stephen Siciliano. I'm the board president of the board of directors of the Traverse Area Historical Society. As we have a number of visitors today, I'd like to just give a brief overview of the Traverse Area Historical Society. We are a nonprofit 501c3. Our mission is to preserve, protect, and present the history of the Grand Traverse region. Our activities include programs, historical tours, archive support, scholarship support, and support of local initiatives to preserve our local history. I'd like to note that this is our final spring program. We devote most of our attention during the summer and early fall to our tours, and all the tours and their dates and times are on our website at traversehistory.org. We are an all-volunteer organization, and the revenues from memberships and donations are what allow us to put on programs like this today. Today's program is West Bay as Traverse City's economic engine. The presentation will tell the story of Traverse City's transformation from the times of the Anishinabek fishing at the mouth of the Boardman Ottaway River through the heyday of the manufacturing and railroads and on to this area's premier focus as a tourist location. Our presenter is Peg Siciliano, who also serves on our board. She has written and presented extensively on local history topics. She holds a master's degree in history from the College of William and Mary and serves many years as the TAHS Archivist for the History Center of Traverse City. So with that, I turn it over to Peg.
Good afternoon. Does this sound good all the way out there? Okay, good. I believe, as far as I know, Glenn Chown, who has for many years and still is the executive director of the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy, is the person who came up with the idea that West Bay is the economic engine of Traverse City. And what I'm going to work on today is going through how it indeed has been that economic engine, beginning before white settlement and all the way up until 2020. These importance held true for the indigenous people, for the logging and lumbering industry, for the manufacturing and industrial people that came in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and indeed it certainly still does today for recreation and tourism. So before the white people came in and began lumbering and farming, the Anishinabek had been here for hundreds of years. And they would come down to what was the mouth of what they called the Ottaway River. We now call it the Boardman River. And they would come down seasonally to fish and pick blueberries and other berries. And it was part of what they called the seasonal round. So the indigenous people would move in small groups from place to place during the year, going to where the food source they would have would be good for that season. And that made it very important. It was a very long life. It was important that the food source was maintained. And so they may not have thought of it in terms of conservation, but it was a very conservation heavy type of lifestyle. These photographs, the top one comes from, now where did it go? Did I turn it off? I turned it off. There we go. This one is probably from the 1870s. You can see the logging industry has started. You can see here, this shelter is built of slabs from the lumber mills. The rest of them look a little more like something that may have existed before a lot of white settlement. The one down below is probably from a good decade. I'm just making a good guess here. Later, you can see the shelters are all out of canvas that would have been obtained probably through the white mercantile enterprises in the area. And down here, you can see birch bark canoes. And I think maybe there's a Mackinac boat right here that was used by the Native Americans. This next image is not actually from around here. It's from a Ojibwe tribe around Toronto, but it's probably very similar to the type of living conditions that the Anishinabek around here lived in. Of course, starting in the mid-1800s, King lumber came into northern Michigan, and it certainly was not low impact. It was very, very heavy impact on the land. It brought unimagined wealth and development to the area, while at the same time there was a lot of environmental degradation that occurred to the riverbanks and through clear cutting. I think we have to remember when we look at that, indeed that did happen, but by and large in the minds of people of the mid to late 1800s, environment wasn't something they were really focused on. It wasn't like they thought about it and thought, who cares, we're going to do it anyway. It just wasn't part of their world view. The idea was to develop and bring wealth to an area and to companies. This all began so here are some images of what the land looked like as the logging industry came in. The top photo will, you can see the clear cutting in the background. The bottom photo is actually, at this time, this mill was called, it belonged to the Fay Company, which is the company that bought this mill and the whole business from Perry Hanna. Perry Hanna came in 1851. Late 1880s, I think he sold at the Face. This would have sat pretty much where the visitor center is today. So it's on the north side of the Boardman River, and Union Street would be right beyond these buildings. The cinder block burner, you see the tall structure, it was more or less at the end of Cass Street. Here is a picture of actually fairly well-built settler's house, but you can see all the clear cutting in front of it. And this image shows what happened to the riverbanks. This is the Boardman River looking from about Wadsworth Street and 5th or Front Street looking southeast. The big house on the left is, oh goodness, don't look yet. The big house on the left is the Perry Hanna Mansion. Back in here, I think this is central, then it would have been the high school in here. The Carnegie Library eventually would end up here. But you can see what all that logging did to the riverbanks. So Harry Boardman came in 1847. He never saw the bay. He may have come once later, but he bought the land at the mouth of the river, sight unseen. He was looking for a lumber. He had a lumber company. He wanted stands of white pine. He heard that this area of northern Michigan would be a great place to have a lumber company. So he bought the land, never having seen it, and he sent his 20-something-year-old son from Chicago to manage the logging and lumbering in what would become Traverse City. The story goes, in fact, we know for sure that the company didn't do very well up here. We're not exactly sure why. My personal guess is maybe a 20-something-year-old guy from Chicago may not have been thrilled to be up here in northern Michigan, where there were probably about 3 houses and not much else sitting around in the lumber industry. He did stick around a while after the company was sold to Perry Hanna, but eventually went back to Chicago. Another thing that happened was in 1850, there was a downturn in the lumber industry. So Boardman may not have been making as much money as he thought he would have been making, but in 1851, he sold to Perry Hanna. Perry Hanna was one of 4 partners in the Hanna and Lake Company that had just started in Chicago, and he would become one of the 4 owners that actually ended up permanently living in Traverse City. I just wanted to give you an idea of why the bay was so important, tying it into the theme of my talk. At this time, in the 1840s, 1850s, into certainly most of the 60s, the only way in and out of this area was either by Indian Trail going south, and this is a Maud Miller Hofmaster painting called The Pioneer Mailman, showing a mailman using probably one of the Native American trails during the winter. They worked. You could get anywhere in the world by following them south, but you couldn't do it with a whole lot of people, and you certainly couldn't do it with big commercial loads. They just weren't built for that kind of thing. So the only way to get commercial loads and a lot of people in and out of here would have been by water. And that would have been mostly during the summer years, because in the wintertime back in those days, the bay always froze over. And so your travel was very limited and you needed the access to water. Boardman knew that, Perry Hannon knew that. And also they needed the water, the bay and the rivers for power sources, for electric and steam power. So Harry Boardman back in Chicago, even though he never got here before he bought it, he knew there was water available, which is really different than if he had like built a lumber mill in Cadillac. Nothing against Cadillac, but it doesn't have the kind of water resources that Traverse City did. Of course, the Native Americans had birch bark canoes. This actually is a picture of a group of Chippewa. Most of the images here come from the Traverse City Area District Library's vintage historic photo collection in their local history collection. A few of them are things I just pulled off of the internet, but this one is from their collection. The settlement, the white settlement in northern Michigan, happened at a time when sailing boats and steamships were both running on the lakes. The steamships were on their way up and the sailing boats were on the way down as far as being used for commercial travel. But there were a lot of sailing boats that would come into the bay in even into the 1870s. And there are descriptions of the bay being full of sailing ships. This one was marked as being Our Son, the Last Vessel on the Lake, under full sail. That's a caption from the collection. I assume it is true, but it's definitely a sailing ship. And you can see the logs piled on the back there. But by the 1880s, steam had taken over. And this is the SS Indiana, which would have docked in Traverse City at some point. In 1872, the railroad came into Traverse City. Eventually, there would be 3 railroads coming into Traverse City. Certainly by 1900, they were all 3 here. And then in the early 20th century, they started not being here. But railroads became an extremely important mode of transportation because until this would have been a road probably in the maybe late teens, maybe the 20s. That's what the roads looked like coming out of Traverse City and going south. So you can see what, because it had been wet, it's obviously muddy. Sometime it would be sandy, but this is why the water transportation, even with the railroads, still stayed important. Roads began to be paved across the nation and from here starting in the 1920s, but it took a while. So Harry Boardman, Harry Boardman decided to sell. He sold to Perry Hanna. Perry Hanna was a man of great vision. He wanted his company to succeed, but at some point he also fell in love with Traverse City, and he wanted Traverse City to survive and succeed. The survival of lumber towns was not a given. most little lumber towns, they grew up when the lumber mills and the logging started. And then when the white pine and the logs ran out, the towns disappeared. Some of them literally burnt to the ground and were never built up again. But Traverse City had two things that a lot of those towns didn't have. It had the bay and it had Perry Hanna. And Perry Hanna was very instrumental in making sure that this city survived. He had a lot of people working around him who were also very talented. I don't have time today to talk about all of them, but I am going to focus a little bit on him. He had three main principles. One of them was diversification, competition, and the encouragement of strong social and cultural networks. So Perry Hanna diversified very soon. There we go. So he had a grist mill that's sitting about where Fish Pass is on Union Street is where that would have been. The Hanna and Lay Mercantile Company, there were 6 bays to begin with. The ones on the right burnt down in 1940. The other 4 are still standing on the northeast corner of Front and Union. They are now high-end condos. And the Fifth Third Bank, it's not the Fifth Third Bank. Is it the Fifth Third Bank now? Yeah, okay. It was the Traverse City State Bank, then it was the Pacesetter Bank, and then it was the Okay, and I joke I can tell when people moved here by which bank they remember it having been. But it is Fifth Third. It was built by Perry Hanna. Originally, it was in the Mercantile Building, and it was the finance center of the Hanna and Lay Company. So he diversified. He also underwrote competition. So James Milliken and Frank Hamilton, yeah, thank you. Frank Hamilton were employees of Perry Hanna, and they wanted to start their own businesses. So he underwrote the start of their business, and their business would eventually become Milliken's, which was on the corner of Front and Cass Street, and Hamilton's Clothing Goods. And they got their start because Perry Hanna had the company pay for it. This was their first building. It was on the south side of Front Street between Park and Cass. I guess I have to be closer. This was their flagship building on the southeast corner of Cass and Front Street. The building is still there. You wouldn't know it, but it was never torn down. The facade has been changed several times, but this is what's there is the original building. And here it is with some thought, the facade having been changed probably in the 1930s. I'm not super good at cars. He also underwrote the Markham Brick Company, which was in Greilickville. And those are those iconic yellow bricks that the state hospital's made out of, that the Hanna and Lay Mercantile Building was made out of. I've done Gold Coast tours in Chicago, and some of the houses on those tours were built out of very familiar looking yellow brick. Whether they ever actually transported it from here to there, I don't know, but it looked really similar. Okay, so as all of these manufacturing companies grew, there were lumber mills, there were mills that made wooden doors and window frames, and I forget what they're called, but the S hooks that are used for a horse team. Hey, thank you. The Haim Company, are they called Haim? Okay, anyway, all those were made here. On the bayfront, you are looking, this is 1870s on the left. You're looking west from about where the Delamar is today. The railroad track runs approximately where Grandview Parkway is today. The mouth of the river that you see down low is about where the Delamar West parking lot is today. Because when they built Grandview Parkway, they curved the mouth a little bit, and now it comes out like here instead of there. you can see, I find this so interesting. I found this photo online, 2021, Traverse City, the best beach or the #1 beach town in the United States. I don't know who said that. Somebody printed it, somebody publicized it, and this is the same beachfront as this. So you can see the tremendous change that has occurred. This is Front Street here, and there's a strong north wind blowing, so it must have been really cold. This happens to be, just to let you know, it wasn't just the bay. This is the west side of Boardman Lake looking north. This is the courthouse here. So the lake, you can see it just here. Where we are would be just across the way a little bit over here somewhere. This is a roundhouse. This is maybe 16th Street in here, but look how industrial that was back in the day. And this is, thank you, roundhouse between 11th and 12th. Perry Hanna also underwrote a lot of social institutions in town. He gave the land for Oakwood Cemetery. He gave the land for the Carnegie Library building. I always said Carnegie, but apparently Carnegie is the proper way to say it. He gave the land for many, many of the churches in town, for Bethel Synagogue, sort of goes on and on and on. He also was very, very instrumental in bringing the Traverse City State Hospital here. Perry Hanna knew that once logging and lumbering went away, the town might just fade away to nothing because you needed to have employers there. And so he was instrumental in bringing the Traverse City State Hospital here. This is probably around the turn of the century. The hospital opened in the early 1880s, and none of these trees would have been there at that time. So however long it took these trees to grow that tall, I think the interesting thing, maybe a lot of us know, but this was the grand entrance into the main building. And it was torn down in the 1950s because of fire code problems. And that is where that sort of low 1950-60 building with Cup of Joe in it was built to replace that. This is also State Hospital. They had greenhouses, the barns. They had a prize-winning milking cow, Calantha Walker. And this is, I just find this interesting. Here is an flight aerial view. And, you know, history keeps moving on. All of these buildings are gone now. They all came down, I'm not sure what decade it was, but it's where Grand Traverse Pavilions is now. This is still there. And this is what it looks like today. I'll talk a little more about the State Hospital later. So I've talked about Frank Hamilton, Milliken, James Milliken, Perry Hanna, and I haven't talked about James Munson yet, but he was the longest and first superintendent, the longest serving superintendent of the state hospital. You notice they're all men. And I just wanted to bring women into the mix here a little bit. Back in the 1800s and well into the 1900s, women certainly had influence, but they tended to hold it and to wield it in different ways than many women are able to do it today. They tended to do it as members of a group. And rather than people knowing their names or they're having super official positions, but they still had a lot of influence in the development of the town. The top picture is the Grand Traverse Women's Club. It was active from 1891 to 2008. It was sort of a study club and a social club, but they also did a lot of good activities for the area. And before they In the 1960s, they were the people behind finding the DeCosca and Phoenix halls that sat on 8th Street and are now run by Addiction Treatment Services. And that was one of the first well-organized addiction treatment facility available in Traverse City, and that was from the efforts of the Grand Traverse Women's Club. The first women's group in town was the Ladies Library Association, active from 1869 to 1958, and their purpose was the encouragement of learning and culture in this isolated place in northern Michigan. What's really interesting about them is they actually owned their own library building. This is on the north side of Front Street between Cass and Park. I believe it's the third building. It is not there any longer. They were helped by one of the members' husbands in purchasing it initially, but the library was on the first floor. The second floor was, for quite a while, the largest meeting room in Traverse City, and they charged for its use. And they eventually were able to make enough money to pay back the husband. So the group officially owned this building, which was somewhat unusual for women of that day. And they made enough money to run the library. And then they eventually moved to, were able to build a brick Ladies Library building on Cass Street, which is still standing today. And the Friendly Garden Club. The Friendly Garden Club still exists. It began in 1923. Yes, founded in 1923. And it is responsible for the garden rectangle that's down on the open space every year. It's very instrumental in the children's garden that was here and that's here at the library. And a lot of the landscaping in city parks as industrial buildings were taken down and parks were created was done by the Friendly Garden Club. So as women were working on improving the culture in the town, and men were busy manufacturing and industrializing. I know I'm being sexist, but that was sort of the way it was back in the day. The men weren't yet thinking of reclaiming the bay, but what they were thinking of was tourism. So despite the fact that the bay was full of stuff, because all of those companies along the bayfront dumped, there was no sewer system. So everything got dumped into the bay. There was no sewer system until the 1930s. So anyone living along the Boardman River, everything from their house went down into the river. That went into the bay. And people didn't seem to mind as much as we might mind today. Because in 1894, the Weckatong Club was built approximately where the Merchant Bridge is today. And so that is West Bay out in front. They had a swimming area. They boated. You also danced, and then they had dinners and everything there. But what's interesting is that this is also West Bay. And what this is, you can't see it very well, but the archives here has a senior thesis paper written in 1920 something, I forget the exact date, by a senior at either Harvard or Yale. And he was getting his degree in public health. And at that time, Traverse City was known among the public health community as a hotbed of waterborne illness because we did not have a sewer plant. And what you really can't see here, but take my word for it, is this is a picture of human excrement along the bay because it would flow down the pipes and into the bay. The other interesting thing about this is the city water supply, the drinking water supply, was taken out just beyond the mouth of the Boardman River in West Bay. It is not taken out from there any longer. We have a sewage treatment plant, and comes from East Bay anyway. But I just want to drive home the fact that there had been a lot of damage done to the water. by this point in time. The city actually had tried to pass 4 or 5 bonds in the teens and the 20s to build a sewage plant. They all failed. Finally, the state stepped in and the state health department came up and said, this is a public health hazard. And if you don't fix it, we're going to close all the beaches down. And we're not going to allow any boating or swimming or anything in West Bay. And the next bond issue passed, and they built the sewage plant that is in the same place it is today on the north end of Boardman Lake. So in the teens and the 20s, the water is beginning to get a little bit cleaner. People are beginning to worry about, to think about it and think about, and again, it wasn't just Traverse City. Environmentalism just wasn't a thing pretty much anywhere at that time. In fact, Michigan would become sort of a hotbed of the early conservation movement in the 20s and 30s, precisely because of all the clear cutting and how that had done a lot, despite all the wealth and development it brought us, which was good, it also done a lot of damage. And because of that, I wasn't here yet, but this area became a real sort of core of conservation movements in the early 20th century. Another thing that happened is we had, Perry Hanna came in. He was a great leader. And in the 1920s, we got Con Foster. Con Foster came here in 1917 to run what was then the Lyric Theater. He worked for the theater company. And he loved it here. But after about 9 months, they moved him to Wisconsin. And he kept wanting to come back. And he finally came back in 1924 and would stay here until he passed away. He would be a city commissioner, a mayor, and the head of the Chamber of Commerce. And he loved, as Perry Hanna had, he loved Traverse City. So in the late 1920s, early 30s, the Bayfront was a mess. A lot of the companies had closed down. Some of the railroads were going out. So there were railroad ties all over the place, industrial waste. Some people were using it as a garbage dump. It wasn't officially a garbage dump, but it was being used as a garbage dump. And Con Foster was one of the many people that looked at that and said, no. So he tried to get the city to fund a cleanup, and the city, for whatever reason, said, no, we're not going to fund a cleanup. So Con Foster and Floyd Clinch of Clinch Park, and Floyd Clinch was Tracy Lay's son-in-law, and he didn't live here, but he visited a lot in Traverse City. So the two of them basically went to the public and said, we're going to have a Saturday. Everybody that wants to is going to come down this weekend to the Bayfront, basically where Cass Street runs into the bay, or ends at the bay, and we're going to start cleaning this place up. And people bought tractors and dump trucks and food and whatever, and it certainly wasn't all done in one day, but it was a start, and that was the start of what became Clinch Park today. And Con Foster also got the WPA funding to build what is now the Bijou by the Bay building. Who knows what's going to happen to it next, but before it was a Bijou, it was the Con Foster Museum. And there was a zoo down there. And it's a beautiful place now. Times change, things change, but what those of us that lived here in the 80s, 90s, remember the zoo, the museum, the train, that whole park idea of the end of the 20th century can be traced back to Con Foster and the townspeople that helped build that. And here's a picture of the Lyric Theater, which sat at the same place as today's State Theater, but can't remember, I think the Lyric burnt down once, then it was rebuilt as the state, then the state burnt down one. The second time was it the state that burnt down? Yeah. So anyway, it burnt down twice. So the building you see to the right that you see today is 3 buildings away from the one you see in the top picture. Fire was a big problem back in the day. And here is the early photo of Confossu Museum. You got to remember that, so this is the end of Cass Street going towards West Bay. The river runs under here. There was no Grandview Parkway at the time. And then down here is just a picture from inside Clinch Park. So the next big thing that led to the cleanup of the bay was also instigated by the state of Michigan. So take a minute here. Until the early 1950s, to come into town from the south, you came up past what is now Grand Traverse Mall, and you'd go around the corner. I'm doing it down here. You'd go around the corner. It was a buffalo farm at that time. And you would go down Rennie Street, which is now Veterans Drive. You'd go to, I'm trying to figure, you go to 14th Street, then you go down Union, and you'd go here. This is Front Street. That was the highway going through town. The state, and I don't think they ever used this word, but today I would say the state wanted to bypass. They did not want the highway going straight down through the downtown business district because it was too slow. So they cut a deal with the city who owned the land that the state would build Grandview Parkway, where we now see Grandview Parkway. And the city they may have had more, but I know of 2. They had 2 things they wanted to get from the state. The state would have to clean all the whatever was still left, the buildings, the debris, all that was still left along the bayfront. The state would have to haul it out and use state money to pay for that. So we would get a much cleaner beach. What we also found out recently, within the last 5 years, is the city also said, and oh, by the way, if you ever want to make major changes to Grandview Parkway, we get a veto. So that came up fairly recently because when the state made the plans for the rebuild of Grandview Parkway that we have now, well, I live on the east side of town, so I'm enjoying the rebuild now. I don't remember if it was the state wanted to do things that the city didn't want it to do, or the city wanted to do things that the state didn't want to do, but someone in the city remembered, I think we have an agreement that we have some veto power on what the state decides to do. Because the state was saying, and apparently the law says, that generally in that kind of an infrastructure project, the state gets the final say. But they found the documentation from back in the 40s that said, the city gets to have a say with this also. So Grandview Parkway was built. And while indeed, I'll talk about this in a minute, while indeed Grandview Parkway is a 4-lane division between downtown and the bayfront, which is, I think Henry Morgan is still alive. Does anybody remember Henry Morgan? He'd write letters to the editor about get rid of the Grandview Parkway. We need a whole, and it certainly is a legitimate point of view, but Morgenstein, sorry, thank you. Anyway, this is a picture probably from the 1940s, Larry or Fred, if you can. I didn't spend a lot of time, 30s or 40s, before the parkway, you're looking east. So, oops, no, sorry about that, guys. Yeah, we'll look at that there. You are looking east here. Here's what would become the open space. You can see, of course, it's a black and white photo, which is a little unfair, but when you go to this one, this is a little farther to the west, but this is a fairly old, early aerial of Grandview Parkway. There were a few buildings left even after Grandview Parkway came on. The Morgan Fruit Processing Company, which this is an early picture of it, and they did a lot of building up on it, and this is what it looked like. Probably just not too long before Grandview Parkway came through. This is Union. And also the Traverse City Light and Power Building was left up when Grandview Parkway. This is when it was being taken down. There were a lot of other manufacturing companies left, a lot of them along the Boardman River, but inside the town. This is the Traverse City Iron Works, which sat where Haggerty, the Haggerty Insurance Agency on Cass Street, and those upscale apartments are. This is another later image of it. This would be Cass Street. Cass, or I'm mixed up. This would be Union probably. That's Cass. Okay, thank you. Potato Implement Company, which sat at the west end of State Street. So you're looking south, north and west here, and sort of the library would be here. There was a starch company still on the bay at the end of Division. There's the canning company again. So I want to talk a little bit about canning companies. So I believe, so back to the bay and why the water is so important to us. Leland Isle Peninsula to a certain extent, but definitely the Old Mission Peninsula has what's called a microenvironment because it's surrounded on three sides by water. So it's a little bit warmer there. And so the people are able to grow grapes and apples and sometimes peaches that wouldn't grow like over by Gaylord because it's too cold there. But within that peninsula, the water makes it just warm enough that you can grow things that you wouldn't be able to grow in northern Michigan otherwise. So at one point in time, early to mid 20th century, I think they all ran at one time, but or close to it. There were 4 fruit processing companies in the city limits of Traverse City. One of them was the Morgan Canning Company at the end of Union Street. Another one was the Traverse City Canning Company that is, this is Lake Street looking west, and Thurlby Auto on 8th would be right here. This is Cherry Growers, which is where the Great Lakes Maritime Academy is today. And I do not have a picture of it, but there was also F&M Canning. Oh, right there. So it's right in the picture. Thank you. Okay. So I think they all 4 operated at one time, Larry. Okay. I did not know that was a canning company. I always learn things when I give this talk. There were a lot of them. Okay. Yeah. And but the point is they were here because of the bay. I wanted to talk a little bit about 2 other people that were very instrumental in developing Traverse City. One of them is Dr. James Munson, who was the first and longest serving superintendent of the Traverse City State Hospital. Up until 1925, or when Munson Hospital opened, looking for the exact date, I know it was in the 1920s. 25, thank you. That was close. There was not a general hospital, not a big general hospital in Traverse City. Of course, we had the Traverse City State Hospital, but that was a psychiatric facility. It did have typhoid wards on it, but it wasn't built or staffed to take care of someone like that, broke their hip or whatever, had a heart attack. That that kind of thing. And there were smaller hospitals in various places around town. They were usually in big homes. A doctor would open one, there might be 11 or 13 rooms in it. When the doctor left, it would close down. So it was very haphazard. And Dr. Munson wanted to see a general hospital built in town. He tried in the teens or earlier than that, it's around the turn of the century, to get the community to be willing to fund a hospital, a general hospital. He actually opened one in an empty building on the state hospital grounds, which is still standing today. This is 11th Street here. But something happened that at least one good thing came out of. The Spanish-American flu hit in 1918. And when that hit, now we've all experienced something very similar to it going through COVID. A lot of interesting similarities if you care to delve into that. Anyway, it hit and hundreds, if not thousands of people got sick, and there was really nowhere to take care of them. The state hospital did open up wards, and there were tents put out to take care of people. A lot of people died. Eventually, we got through the pandemic, but it gave the town the push to back Munson in building a general hospital. And so this is Munson Hospital here. It was never torn down. It's somewhere inside all of this. And if you go around the back, if you drive that, I think it's Red Drive that goes like around the back now and don't have a wreck, and you look towards the back of the building, you can still see some of the original brick walls back there. Oh, it is? Okay. So I just find somebody, years ago, decades ago, I was in there for something, and one of the maintenance guys showed me an inside wall that he said was an original wall, but I couldn't tell you where it was. Yes. Oh, okay. Great. The other person I want to talk to briefly, who is connected somewhat to the Bay, is Les Biederman. So Les Biederman did not come here because of the water in the Bay. He was from Philadelphia. He was in the media industry, and he and his partners wanted to find a place in the United States that needed media service. So they literally got out a map and looked at it, and it was mapped like where all the different radio stations were and where they weren't. And they found the places that were lacking service. And one of them was Northern Michigan. And that's why he came to Northern Michigan in 1931, I believe. Yeah, sometime in the 30s, 39. I'm sorry, I'm talking instead of reading my notes. 39. Came in 30. He wrote. He started the first radio station in the area, WTCM, in 1941. So he came in 39, radio station in 41, a TV station in 54, the Paul Bunyan Network. And it was so successful that the Biedermans have become one of the philanthropic powers within Traverse City. But the reason he's connected to the Bay is he also had attended a junior college in Philadelphia, a two-year school. And he really supported the idea of two-year education. So he's one of the primary backers of NMC, which opened in 1951. A little more NMC. And he was the driving force behind the founding of the Great Lakes Maritime Academy, which is a one-of-a-kind. There are lots of maritime academies, but this is the only one on the Great Lakes. And there are certain things about it that are unique and different because it also serves the lakes and not just the ocean. And that is pretty much at the feet of Les Biederman. So in the last 50 years, we have continuing rebirth and tourism. One thing that happened was Traverse City, I moved here in 1985, And there were at least 2 boarded up or at least closed with boards in the windows businesses downtown at the time that I moved here. I knew a lot of people, I still do, but at the time I knew a lot of people that had been here either their whole life or were 20 years older than me, and talked a lot about what the downtown Traverse City was like in the 40s and 50s and 60s and how wonderful it was. And in my mind, I love Frank Capra. So in my mind, I envision it as being a lot like Bedford Falls in It's a Wonderful Life. And Stacy's was still here, so people told me you could go and pay yourself. They would trust you to pay whatever your bill was. There was still the tea room at Milliken's. There was still J.C. Penney's, and Ward's had just closed. There were a lot of wonderful things about downtown. But to quote Bob Dylan, the times they were a-changing. And in 1970, I got this written down, 78, the Cherryland Mall opened. 1992, the Grand Traverse Mall opened, and then after that, all the big box stores came in. Downtown was going to have to change or not survive. And I would have loved to have it look like Bedford Falls. I love that idea, but I don't know if it would have survived that way. We had, and this is Traverse City downtown in the 20s. I'd have to look better at the cars. Here it is in the 40s. A person, again, did not do it all on his own, but sort of rose to the top and became the name on the redevelopment, if you want to call it that, of downtown Traverse City in the 90s and the early 2000s. He came from Kansas. He came to town in 1980. He was the executive director of the Arts Council, a city commissioner, a mayor, and then really shifted into high gear when he became the executive director of what is now the DDA. I think those people, and it wasn't just him, there were lots of people working around him, they must have asked themselves, what is it about Traverse City that sets us aside from other towns? And what can we bank on and put our money in and help develop that will make us survive into the 21st century? And I'm assuming the Bay had something to do with it. So again, the Bay, the economic driver of what Traverse City is or can be. And Brian Coe certainly was the leader of that. My catty corner neighbor was a gentleman named Clayton Spory. I don't know if anyone knew Clayton, but Clayton did not like the new Traverse City. He died at 90 something, probably 10 years ago. So he grew up in the 30s and 40s and he loved the old Traverse City. And there is something to be said. You don't go, the regular person doesn't go shopping for groceries downtown anymore. But it's there and it's beautiful, in my opinion. 2 more things. It is a whole hour talk when we started. I have like 7 minutes here. Another thing I need to bring up in terms of why Traverse City is what it is today is Rotary. So the Traverse City Rotary Club, and I am going to check the dates on this because I have them right. In 1923, the Traverse City Rotary Club purchased land to the southeast of town. So like around Spider Lake, Arbutus, like out there. In 1975, oil was found on that land. Now, the Rotary Club, and I don't think this is too far of a stretch, very quickly became one of the richest Rotary clubs in the world.
But also, Rotary did buy the land up there, 23, along called community camps.
Okay.
Bankrupt. And Rotary, as they TADL, you would discover you could buy shares in it. You made all this Rotary monies, buy shares of community camps, you made a Rotary camp.
Okay.
And that's where the land came from. It was Ron Saunders.
Okay. Right. Well, then, so they didn't own, they never owned the land?
Bought it in 1940
Okay,
when the community camps went bankrupt.
okay.
They bought it in 23.
Okay, well, at some point they bought that land, and when the oil was discovered, the money, they had the mineral rights, and the money went to, and I appreciate people correcting if I've gotten dates or anything else wrong. Anyway, it could have built the fanciest Rotary Club in the world. It would have been not that it isn't great to belong to Rotary now, but they could have sent their members around the world on wonderful trips and all that. They didn't do that. Instead, they started Rotary Charities. And many, many of the positive things that have happened in Traverse City in the last 30 or 40, 50 years are because Rotary has been there to help fund them. That's this one. I do not. The woman in the middle is a Cherry Queen. Yay, we know now. And I'm not sure exactly what year that is, but she is the Cherry Queen. I think it's the 60s. And these are a bunch of Rotary guys out around the oil wells looking, do they look happy? They should look happy. But when you think of things like the continued success of the Park Place Hotel, Rotary poured a lot of money into the Park Place Hotel. A lot of even smaller nonprofits in town, a lot of their activities have in part at least been underwritten by Rotary, the State Theater, the City Opera House. It sort of goes on and on and on. We are very blessed to have an organization in town that has chosen to pour its wealth back into the community. And speaking of Rotary, we can round, I have two more things. We can round back to women here. It just so happens that over the last 50 years or so, and I want people who have a skill they want to use in the community to be able to use it, be they male, female, whatever. But because some women do have really good management and leadership styles, I think it's probably a good thing for us that there's more open entry into those types of jobs today. And it just so happens that the last leaders of Rotary Charities have been women. We had Marcia Smith and Becky Ewing, and the current CEO is, I wrote her name, Sakura Takano. And there's one more woman I want to close off with before I end tonight. Carol Hale. So Carol Hale was a history teacher by profession. She was a city commissioner. She was a mayor at one point, but what she will probably go down being known as within the community is the woman that, and here we have a woman literally leading a movement. So she stands next to Con Foster and Perry Hanna in this terms, the salvation of the state hospital buildings. So the state wanted to, in my memory, they wanted to tear those down. They were really expensive to keep and to keep people out of them and to pay insurance and all that. So they wanted to tear them down. People in Traverse City, not just Carol, lots of people did not want to see that happen. And there was a group formed whose name I do not have written down, but they worked really hard for at least 10 years to get the state, one, to turn the land over, and it was not to the city and not to the county, it was to this development entity whose name I don't have off the top of my head, for $1. And then they worked really, really hard to find a developer that would take on developing the state hospital. And they tried one first that didn't work out, and then I don't know the story behind how they found the Minervinis, but they found the Minervinis. And so now the state hospital redevelopment, I haven't researched this in the last couple of years, but I think it's the only Kirkbride, there's 2 Kirkbride state hospitals in the country that are still standing. One's in New York and one is here. And the one in New York is still standing and has had a little bit of development done on it, but certainly the Traverse City State hospital redevelopment into the Grand Traverse Commons is the most successful. And I can even tie the end of this to the water of the bays, because this is where I'm ending now. I, again, have never interviewed him, and I'm not even doing this by reading anything. I'm just guessing. If I were Ray Minervini and I was thinking, these people want me to take this project on, he must have had reason to believe that it was financially possible, that it was something that could be done. And I'm going to say, without going too much out on the limb, part of the reason that it could be done was because of the bay and the beauty of the area, and the fact that Ray, along with a lot of other people, foresaw that people were going to want to be moving into Traverse City, and perhaps people that might have the desire and the wherewithal to support something like the Grand Traverse Commons. So that's the end of my economics and the water of the bay talk. It was very quick. I covered 150 years. I know I missed a lot. I apologize. If you have any questions afterwards, you can come up and ask me. Any corrections or additions would be greatly appreciated. There are cookies and punch back in the corner, and we super appreciate you all being here. I'm glad it was a cold day, so at least you're not missing a nice, hot, almost summer-like day. Thank you very much.